In today's video, you are going to build a voting application for tech courses. The voting application allows people to vote courses from tech so people can find quality courses. If you like a course and think it's a good quality course, you can upvote it. The more upvotes a course has, the higher it appears on the page. To build the application, you will use GraphCMS, Nuxt.js, and TailwindCSS. Without further ado, let's start building the application. Before going further, let's talk a bit about GraphCMS. GraphCMS is the first GraphQL native headless CMS. It aims to eliminate the pain points of traditional content management by leveraging the power of GraphQL. Let's see how GraphQL aims to do that. Some of the most notable features of GraphCMS are as follows. It has a single GraphQL endpoint that supports queries and mutations. It comes with an excellent user interface. You can use it to build, configure, and maintain the backend of your application through their UI. It has content localization. That means you can localize and translate content into any language. It supports environments on paid plans, which allows you to work on new features in isolation and then promote that to the main environment. And it has intelligent edge caching, which means that your query responses are cached across 190 edge points of presence around the world. These are just a handful of features to convince you of its power. In a nutshell, you can use GraphCMS as a database or content management system, as can be inferred from the name. The first step of the tutorial is to create a GraphCMS account, which you can do by going to graphcms.com and then click on the sign up button. Once you click on the sign up button, it takes you to the registration page where you can sign up with different social media accounts. You can either sign up with Facebook, with GitHub, with Google, or with custom details. For the purpose of this video, I'm going to sign up with Google. So first of all, we need to agree to the terms of service and privacy policy. So let's click on this and then let's click on sign up with Google. Let's choose the account and let's wait. Now here we have the welcome screen. We can start the tour or skip to overview. For this tutorial, let's click on start tour and see what we find. So define your schema. Within minutes, define everything about your GraphQL API, structures, relations, powerful permissions, and then let's click on continue. Manage your content. We give your content creators the tools they are used to, text editors, workflows, advanced roles. You can also use your generated mutation API to ingest content into your project. Let's click on continue and connect your applications. Use your generated GraphQL API to deliver content into any platform of your choice. Let's click on get started to start configuring our project. On this page, you can see that you have some starter templates from GraphCMS. You can spin up a blog, a commerce shop, marketing website, podcast, travel site, and so on. However, for the purpose of this tutorial, we want a new blank project. And before we create the project, let's establish what the structure of the project is. For this project, we need to store courses and their authors. Therefore, we need one model or schema for courses and another one for authors. Also, there will be a many-to-many relationship between the two, which means that a course can have multiple authors and authors can have multiple courses. Therefore, let's start by clicking on this blank button. Click on it, and now we have to choose a name and a description for our project. Let's choose something like voting app, and for the description, this is an application that allows people to vote tech courses. And now we have to choose the CDN. I'm based in Europe, so I'll choose this one and click on the create project. Now you are taken to the pricing page. From here you have 4 pricing models. However, for our project, the free forever plan is more than enough because we have 1 million API calls, 100 gigabytes asset traffic, 25 content models, 5,000 content entries, and like I said, it's more than enough. So select this one. And here you can invite team members so they can work with you on the project. We don't have any, so we invite them later. And here we are in the dashboard. And here you can see that you have a quick start guide, which tells you and guides you to create your first project. The next step is to create the models or our schemas. So let's click on the first step. And here you can see you can add models from the left hand side of the application. So first of all, let's add the course model. Click on add. Let's choose the name course, and you can see that it automatically adds the plural version as well. And let's also add the description, something like this model represents courses. Let's click on create model, and the next step is to create the author model. So let's add author, and something like this model represents the authors or the course authors. So let's click on create model. The next step is to configure the models, which means that we describe what we store about each course and author. For example, for courses we will have a name, a description, a link, votes, and authors. For an author we will have their full name, a short biography, and their Twitter link. Therefore, let's start by configuring the course model. Let's choose the model first, and then for the name, let's choose a single line text. So let's enter name, and let's add a description such as the name of the course. Let's add a validation such as making this field required, so we make sure users cannot add courses without a name. And let's click on create. Let's also add a description field, and let's choose markdown for this one. So description, and let's add a description of the description. This represents the course description. Let's go and add some validations. First of all, let's make this field required as well, and then let's also tick the limit character count, because we want people to enter a description between 100 characters and 1000 characters. So let's choose 100 and 1000. Let's also add a custom error message so people know what the issue is. You either wrote too much over 1000 characters or too few under 100 characters. And let's click on the create button. The next field is the vote field, which represents the number of votes for a course. So let's click on the number type. Let's add the name vote. Let's add a description such as this field represents the course votes. And also we want to make sure this field always starts from 0. So let's go to the advanced tab, and let's set an initial value, which is 0. Let's click on create. The next field we will add is the URL field. The URL field represents the course URL. So let's click on the single line text. Let's add URL. Let's add a description such as the course URL, and let's also add some validations. Let's make this field required, and let's match a specific pattern. So as you can see, only accept specified regular expressions. Let's choose the URL, and it automatically auto-completes the regular expression. And we can also add a custom error message, which is something such as the URL you entered is not valid. And let's click on the create button. Now we need to configure the author model, and after we have the author configured, we can create the relationship. So let's go to the author model by clicking on the author here, and let's start by adding the required fields, which are name, short biography, and Twitter profile link. Let's add the name field, which is a single line text. So name, this field represents the name of the author. Let's go to validations. Let's make this field required, and let's make this field unique as well. We don't want to have multiple persons with the same name. Let's click on create. The next step is to add the biography field. So let's choose multi-line text. Let's write biography, and let's add a description such as this field represents a short bio about the author. Let's go to validations. Let's make this field required. Let's make it unique, and let's add a limit character count validation. We want the bio to be between 100 and 500 characters. So let's add the minimum 100 and maximum 500. And as usual, let's add a custom error message. And the custom error message is something such as try to keep the bio between 100 and 500 characters. And let's click on the create button. The last step is to add the Twitter profile field. So let's do just that. Let's choose the single line text for this field. So Twitter profile, and let's add a description. This field represents the Twitter profile of the author. And let's go to validations. Let's make sure this field is required. Let's make sure is unique, because we don't want two persons with the same Twitter account. And let's also match a specific pattern. So let's choose from here URL again, and let's add a custom error message such as you entered an invalid URL. And let's click on the create button. And now you can see that both models are configured. You can see that the author has a name, biography, and Twitter profile, and the course model has a name, description, vote, and URL. That means the next step is to create the relationship between the two models. So how can you create relationships? You can create relationships by using the reference field. So here you can see the reference field, and it says content relationship underneath. So let's click on that one, and let's choose the model to reference. Let's choose author because we are in the course model. And here you can choose the type of relationship by either clicking on this drop down box or by ticking this. You can see that you have many to many one, or you can choose from here and it will change, but let's leave it many to many, and leave everything here by default. Don't make any other changes. Click on continue, leave this reference as it is, click on continue. We leave the reverse field by default, and let's create the relationship. And now you have the relationship between courses and authors. You can see it here, and you can also see it in the author model. The next step is to add some content into your application. You can do that by clicking on this option here, which says create content. So let's click on that, and let's start by creating an author. You can enter your details, and I'll enter mine. So Catalin Pitt. Let's find some text for the biography. So Lorem Ipsum. Let's copy something from here. Let's copy this first one. Let's go to the biography. Let's paste it. And you can see it's too big. So let's try to delete it and make it work. It seems it works now. Let's add the Twitter profile. https twitter.com Catalin M. Pitt. And let's save it and publish it. So save and publish. And now you can see that we have the first author, which is me. And the next step is to create a course. Click on the create item button, and let's choose a name for our course. Let's say something such as GraphCMS course. Let's copy something from here again. So let's copy this paragraph. You can even preview your content, which is really cool. You have the votes, which is the default value 0, and you can also add the URL, and for this one I'll use my blog, so catalins.tech. And here you can see that you can add authors for your course. Let's click on add existing authors and let's select Catalin. Let's click on add selected author and you can see that they are linked now. Or if you want to create a new one, you can click on this option and create a new author straight from here. However, for now we just link the existing data. So let's save and publish it and let's check if it worked. You can see that we have a new course now. Let's edit it and see everything is here. So it seems it works. You already have content in your application. You can see how easy it is to start a new application, create models, and create relationship between the models, and then add data. GraphCMS also has a GraphQL Playground, which is really cool, and you can use it to play with your data. You can access the playground by clicking on this play button. So click on it and you can see that you have Explorer here. So let's get all the courses from the database. Let's click on this courses field. Then let's choose the ID, the name, the description, the URL, the vote, and let's also choose the authors. So let's say we only want the name. And here you can see that it returns the data from the database. And similarly, you can get the authors. You can run any query you want. So let's go to authors. Let's choose the name, biography, and then let's choose the Twitter profile and courses. For this example, let's choose only the name and description. So you can see that it returns all the authors in your database and their courses. So it's really, really useful. The thing I like the most about this GraphQL Playground is that you have the Explorer on the left hand side and you can build queries and mutations interactively rather than writing them yourself, which is a huge time saver. You can also write mutations and add data to your database, remove data from your database, and I'll show you how. Click here on add new mutation and let's choose a mutation such as create course, and here we have the data. For the URL, let's choose something such as GraphCMS.com. For the name, let's choose something like Twitter course, and for description we need the text from here again, so let's choose this and let's hope it works. It's not too short or too long, so let's paste it. And here we also have to select some fields. Let's choose something such as name and let's run the mutation. You can see that it successfully added the course to the database, and we can check by going to the content. If you go to course, you can see that you have the new course which is in the draft mode, and you can publish it by clicking on the publish button. However, we don't want to publish it because it was just an example, so let's delete it and let's go back to the playground. But I want to mention that you can publish it from here as well. You can create another mutation and you can publish it. As you can see here, look, publish course. If you choose this mutation, you'll publish the course. In a similar fashion, you can add an author and I'll invite you to play with it. If not, you can follow me and see how I create the author. So let's say create author, name, my name, Twitter profile, let's choose something such as https twitter.com blah blah, and for the biography let's use this one. Let's go back to biography, let's paste it. Let's also choose some fields, name, created at, and let's see what happens. you see that we have too many characters, so let's delete some, and we still have too many, and we still have too many. It seems this one is too long, and you can see that the author was created. Let's go back to the content, and here you can see it's in the draft mode again, but we don't need it, so let's delete it. So this is the GraphQL Playground, and you can see how useful it is. You can manipulate and query data here. I fully encourage you to play with this GraphQL Playground and see how it works. The next step of the tutorial is to set the API access to manipulate data outside the GraphCMS user interface. You need a permanent auth token. Therefore, before you can use the API in your frontend application, you need to set the permissions, and we can do that by clicking on this option which says make your API accessible, and here we have the content API and the management API. For our application, you'll need the content API to manipulate data. First of all, let's create some permissions for people that are not authenticated. For people that are not authenticated, we only want them to be able to read the data, but nothing more than that. So here you can initialize with the defaults, which is read all models on stage published with all locales. So let's click on this button, initialize. So now all the readers, visitors, and users who are not authenticated can read the data but cannot mutate data and cannot perform operations like creating new data, deleting existing data, and so on. The next step is to create the permanent auth token. According to the GraphCMS documentation, the permanent auth tokens are used for controlling access to querying, mutating content, and comes in the form of bearer token authentication. So let's click on this button saying create token. Let's choose a name such as voting app token, and let's choose a description such as the production token, and default stage for content delivery, let's leave it as published, and let's click on create and configure permissions. And now we need to set the permissions for authenticated users, and we can do it straight here. Here you are in your token dashboard. So if we go back to the API access, here you can see that is the public API and the permissions for the public API. But now you can go into the dashboard for your newly created auth token, which is here, and you can configure the permissions. We are only interested in the content API because this is the one we are using to manipulate data. So let's create some permissions for it. Here I advise you to choose the models individually because you have other models such as asset and user which are created by the system, and maybe you don't want the same permissions for everything. So let's choose the author. Let's give the following permissions: read, create, update, delete, publish, unpublish, and read versions. So we give it full access to everything. Let's create it, and we have to wait a bit. And now we have to do the same thing for the courses model. So let's click on create permissions, let's choose course, and let's tick all the boxes again. This way we can create, and not only create, but we can manipulate data from our front-end application. So here you have all the permissions for both of your models. Now you are ready to use the API in your front-end application. Before going further and building the front-end for the application, I want to show you how to get your endpoint URL and auth token. So you can go here to settings and to API access, and you have the endpoint here. You copy this one, and you also have the token here which you can copy by clicking on it. This is the details you need, and this is how you get them. The next and last step is to build the front-end part for the application. So let's do just that. For the front-end part, you are going to use Nuxt.js, which is a Vue framework. Therefore, let's start by running npx create Nuxt app voting app, and you will be prompted with a series of questions, and your project will be configured based on what you answer. For the project name, let's leave the default name. For the programming language, let's choose JavaScript. For the package manager, let's choose npm, although you can use yarn as well if you want. For the UI framework, let's use TailwindCSS. For the Nuxt.js modules, we don't need any, so press enter. For the linting tools, we need ESLint and Prettier. You can select the options with the space key. After that, press enter. For testing, we don't need any framework. For the rendering mode, you need universal. Press enter. For deployment target, choose server. For development tools, choose JS config by using the space key. Press enter. For continuous integration, we don't need anything, so let's choose none. And for version control system, you can use Git or none. For this video, I'll use Git. And now you can see that the packages get installed. So you can see that the app was configured and installed successfully. And here you can see the Nuxt.js app. Let's start by deleting the default components. So let's delete the logo, the tutorial. Let's also remove the tutorial component from index.view. And let's create our own components. Go to components folder, create course card.view, which represents a card for the course. Let's also create the course list.view. This will loop over the courses and will render a course card for each course. Let's also create the hero component. And lastly, let's create the footer component. Before going further, you need to set up the environmental variables as well, which store sensitive information. You'll use the GraphCMS endpoint and the bearer token throughout your application, so you don't want to expose them. Let's open the terminal and let's install the .env package as follows: npm I at Nuxt.js.env, and let's wait for the module to be installed. Now the next step is to go to the Nuxt.config.js and let's add the module. You can see here an array called build modules. Here is where we add the .env module. So at Nuxt.js.env, let's save it. And now let's create the .env file in the root directory of the project, .env. Let's add the fields, GraphCMS endpoint, and also bearer token. Now let's go to GraphCMS to get all this information. Like I said, you go to the API access to endpoints, copy the content API, go back to the .env file, and now let's go and pick the bearer token. Let's go to the permanent auth tokens. Let's click on the token to copy it. It's copied to the clipboard. Let's go back to the app and let's save it. Now you can use this information safely throughout your application. There are two more steps left until we can build the components. The first step is to create the GraphCMS plugin for Next.js, and the second is to create a custom API endpoint for the voting feature. Therefore, let's start by creating the GraphCMS Nuxt.js plugin. The first step is to go into the root directory of the project and create a new folder called plugins, and then inside the plugins folder create a new file called GraphCMS.js. Inside this file we need to create a new GraphQL instance and then pass the GraphCMS endpoint and the bearer token. So let's do just that. Let's start by importing the GraphQL client from the GraphQL request package. And then let's create the new instance of GraphQL client. So const GraphCMS client, new GraphQL client, and then here we need to pass the GraphCMS endpoint. We can do it as follows: GraphCMS endpoint, and then we also have to pass the bearer token, and the GraphQL client allows us to set the headers. So let's pass the authorization token, authorization bearer, and then inside we pass our bearer token, such as bearer token. And now we are almost ready. What we have to do is to export the GraphCMS client. So let's write export default inject, and then we have an arrow function, and we have to inject the GraphCMS client. And before we can use the GraphCMS client, we have to do one more step, and that is going to Nuxt.config.js, and let's register the plugin here. We can register the plugin as follows. So plugins GraphCMS.js, and let's save it. Now you can use the GraphCMS client throughout your application. The next step is to create the custom API endpoint for voting. Nuxt.js allows you to create custom API endpoints in your application. For instance, you can create an Express server inside your Nuxt application. Nuxt.js has a server middleware property that allows you to use additional custom API routes without needing an external server. Therefore, the first step is to create another directory in the root directory of the project. So let's create a new folder called server-middleware, and inside that we create a new file called upvote-course.js, and all we do in this file is to create a new Express server. However, before we can use this custom API endpoint, we have to go into the Nuxt.config.js, and we have to add a new property. At the end of the file, add the following line: server middleware, and then we have to pass the path, which is server middleware upvote course.js. Save it, and now the last step is to build the Express server. Let's start by importing the packages needed, such as Express. So const express require Express, and then let's import the GraphQL client again, because we have to make GraphQL requests. So require GraphQL request, and then let's create a new instance of Express, const app equals Express, and also we will send JSON responses, so we have to use the express.json middleware. So app.use express JSON, and now we can send back JSON responses. To create the GraphQL client, we need to do the same thing we did for the GraphCMS plugin. So let's go inside that file into the GraphCMS.js, and let's simply copy this, and then here let's create a new constant client, and let's paste what we copied. And now we have a new instance of the GraphQL client, which we can use inside the Express server. Before going further, we have to install the Express package. So open the terminal and run npm install Express so it can be used. And let's close this and start building the API endpoint. So we want to make a post request to this endpoint. So let's write app post upvote, and then we have a dynamic value which will be the ID of the course, and then async request response, and we have an arrow function. We can get the ID from the request parameters, so let's destructure it as follows: const slug request params. And after that we need to do 3 actions in this method. We have to get the course from the database using the slug, which is the course ID. We have to increment the votes, and we have to republish the course. Therefore, you need one GraphQL query and 2 mutations. You retrieve the course from the database with a query, but to upvote and publish a course, you need a mutation. Therefore, we can store the query and the mutations in separate constants. So let's start first by building the GraphQL query. So what we do in this query, we retrieve the slug from the URL, which is actually the ID of the course, and then we pull from the database the ID, the number of votes, and the name of the course. So the next step is to build the mutation for voting courses. So let's do just that. So for this mutation, we pass this slug, which represents the ID of the course and the number of existing votes. And then we call the method updateCourse, where we pass all this information. So we pass the ID, so the application can identify the course we want to update. And then we pass the new number of votes. For example, if a course had 22 votes, in this mutation, we will pass the new number of votes, which is 23. So every time somebody clicks on the voting button, it will increment the existing number of votes by 1. The last mutation is the mutation for publishing a course, because if we don't publish the course will go in draft mode after doing this mutation, which means the new data won't be available in our app. So we have to publish the course. So here is how you publish a course. Similar to the other mutation and query, you can see that we pass the ID, so the application can identify the course, and then we retrieve from the database the ID, the name, and the number of votes. So we are almost there with the Express server. Lastly, we need to use the GraphQL client to make this request. So the following request will retrieve the course from the database. So let's do it. Const course equals await client request get course, and then we pass the slug, which is the ID of the course. So to make it clear, this client is the client we defined here, and then the get course variable is this query. So we pass this query, and also we pass this slug, which is the ID of the course. And once the course is returned from the database, you need to increment the number of votes and store it in a new variable. So here is where the existing votes come into play. So course vote plus 1. If you remember, we use the existing votes variable inside this mutation, and this is what the variable is. And now you upvote the course by making a request to the database and passing the slug or the course ID and existing votes, which is the new incremented number of votes. So let's do that. Const vote course await client request upvote course, and then we have to pass the slug and existing votes. And here you can see that we make a GraphQL request using the upvote course mutation. You can see it here. This is the mutation, and we pass the ID of the course and the new incremented number of votes. And lastly, if you remember, I said that when you perform a mutation, the new data goes into draft mode, but we needed it in published mode, so let's publish it. Const published course await client request publish course, and then let's press the slug, and we are almost done. After the operation is successful, let's send back a JSON message saying that course was upvoted successfully, and we can also pass the number of votes. So vote published course vote. So let's make this smaller so you can see how everything works. So we imported the packages needed to build this server and API endpoint, and then we created a new GraphQL client, and then we created the endpoint. We have 2 queries and 2 mutations. First of all, we get the course from the database, we upvote the course through this mutation, and then we publish the course. And here you can see all the requests. Also, before we are done with the custom API endpoint, we have to export it. So let's write module export equals app. Now we can move on to the next step, which is about creating the components and seeing our application live. Instead of making you watch me how I code and waste your time, because it will take a while to write everything, I'll just copy paste the components code from this GitHub repository, and then I'll explain how each line works. I hope and believe that this approach will make a better use of time, and it will be more efficient than watching me code. So let's start by copying the hero code. Let's go into this file, let's copy this code, let's go to VS Code, let's open hero.view, let's add the code. All this code does is to render a heading and a paragraph. The heading says vote your favorite courses, your favorite will be bold, and then the paragraph says finding the right courses in tech is difficult. This is all about the hero.view component, which is really simple. And now let's go and import hero.view in index.view. So let's go to pages, index.view, and let's import hero. Now we can check if everything works by going to the terminal and running the application npm run dev, and then we have to wait for the application to start. Let's go to the URL and see how the application looks. And you can see that the hero component works, and we already have something displayed on the page. Therefore, we can move on to building the course card component. So let's go to the GitHub repository. Let's open the course card file, and let's copy everything inside here. And don't worry, because I'll explain what they do. Let's go back to VS Code, to course card, and let's paste it. And let's make this smaller as well. So here you can see a bunch of Tailwind classes. This is not a Tailwind course, so I'm not gonna spend time explaining them. And here you can see an H2, which is the title for the course. And this data comes from the database. Everything that's inside the mustache notation, it's coming from the database. And it's a Nuxt link, which means that when you click on the course title, it will take you to a separate page where you can see more information about the course. Here we have the authors. This one will display all the authors that contributed to this course. Here we have an excerpt. For example, on the homepage, we don't want to show the whole description. We only want to show part of the description. And here in this paragraph, you can see that it displays the number of votes a course has. This new vote comes from the database, is dynamic like all the things inside the mustache notation. And here we have the button that allows people to vote courses. You can see that we have a click event. So when somebody clicks on this button, the course will be upvoted. So we increment the number of votes. In the second part, which is the script part, we define all the props, their type, and we also make them required. So they need to be passed to the component. After that, we created a new field called new vote, because mutating props directly is an anti-pattern. For example, when we vote an application, we shouldn't modify this prop directly. Therefore, we assign the value from the vote prop to this new property. Also, this new property called new vote is updated and displayed on the page when a user votes the course. And here is where the voting happens. You can see the method fetch data, which is assigned to this click event. So when somebody clicks on this button, this fetch data is called. For this fetch data method, we define what type of request we make, which is a post request, and then we make a post request to the custom API endpoint which we created earlier here in the server middleware folder. Therefore, when somebody clicks on the button, it makes a post request to our custom API endpoint, and then it assigns the new updated number of votes to this field. And if we go above, you can see that it's used here. And lastly, we use the computed property to return only a part of the description. Therefore, let's move on by building the course list component. So let's go to GitHub. Let's open courselist.vue and let's copy everything from here. Let's go to VS Code. Let's open the component and let's paste it. Here you can see that we loop over the courses, which is an array. So for each course in the courses array, we render a course card. For the course card, we pass the course ID, the course name, the course description, the course URL, the course vote, and the course authors. If you remember, in the course card, we defined all these props and made them required. You can see them here, so we need to pass them. This component will only receive the courses prop, which is an array, and it's also required. And by default, it's an empty array. Therefore, this component receives an array of courses, and then we loop over those courses, and for each course we render a course card. Now let's use the course list component to render the courses from the database on the home page. So let's go to index.vue and let's import the components such as course list. But maybe you saw that we didn't pass any array of courses. Therefore, it's not going to render anything on the page. And that brings us to the next step, which is building the home page. The home page is this index.vue page, and it's made of the following components. It's made of the hero component, course list component, and the footer component, which we'll build later. Therefore, let's pass the courses to this component as follows. But where are these courses coming from? Because we don't make any requests or we don't have any array here, so where are they coming from? We get the courses array from the database. You can load data from the database asynchronously using the async data hook. Also, you make a GraphQL request, so you need a special package called GraphQL request. Let's go back to the GitHub repository to get the code. So let's go to index.vue, pages, index.vue, and let's copy the script tag and let's replace it. And here you can see the async data hook in action, and this is how we make the request to the database. You can see that we use the same package we used in the custom API endpoint, and we also use the GraphCMS plugin which you created earlier, and it's this one. Here you can see that we call the request method with the following GraphQL data. We pull all the courses from the database, and we are interested in the ID, the name, description, URL, vote, and author's name for each course. And you can also see that we order these courses by the number of votes in descending order. That means the courses with the most votes will be displayed first. And after we retrieve the data from the database, we return it. So let's save the file and let's check and see if it works. Let's refresh the page, and you can already see the course. You can see that we have the course from the database on our application. So you can see that it successfully pulled the course from the database. Let's click on the vote button and see if it works. You can see that the number was incremented and now the course has 1 vote. And if we click again, it will have 2 votes and so on. However, what happens when we click on the course title? Let's see. You can see that it says the page couldn't be found. So the next step is to build the individual page for each course. So let's do just that. Let's go into the pages folder and let's open the slug.view. And this is how you create a dynamic page in Nuxt or Vue. You prefix the name of the file with the underscore in the pages directory. So let's copy everything from this one. Let's go to the code editor and let's create the file, which is underscore slug.view, and let's copy the code. And here you can see the same async data hook being used. You can see that we use the GraphCMS plugin to make the request. We get the slug from the parameters. And here we get only one course, not all the courses. So we have to pass the slug, which is the ID of the course. So you can see get the course where the ID is ID from the slug. And then we get the ID of the course, the name, the description, the URL, the vote, the authors. And for each author, we get the name, the biography, and the Twitter profile. And here we make the request. We pass the query and the slug and then return the course. And here you can see the template, which is how the page will look. You can see that we have the course name, we have the course authors, course description, the URL to the course, the number of votes, and we also have some information about the author. So let's save it and let's go back to the application and see if it works. So let's click on the course title or course name and see what happens. And here we are. You can see now more information about the course. You can see the title, the course author, the full description. You can see the URL to the course. You can see how many votes it has, and you can also see information about the author. You can see the name, the Twitter profile, and the biography. If you click on this handle, it will take you to the author Twitter. So we can go back, we can vote it again, we can go into the course page and see that it has 3 votes. Therefore, the last step is to build the footer page, which is really simple. It contains just 2 icons. So let's go to the GitHub repository. Let's open the footer file and let's copy it. Let's go to the editor. Let's add all the code here. Let's go to the index page and let's import the footer component. And let's do the same thing for the slug page. Let's do it here and see how it looks. You can see now that we have the icons, and if we go to the home page, we should have the same icons. So here it is. The application is done. You have an application where you can add courses and vote them. The application is not perfect and there are improvements that you could make, and some of them are as follows: adding images for the courses, allowing people to comment, only allowing 1 vote per user, because as you can see now I can vote how many times I want, add authentication and authorization, and so on. Also, if you want and prefer written stuff, I have an article on the same topic, so you can go on catalins.tech and read the article, which is exactly the same.